with it because I'm hoping that there'll be some ideas here that may be new to you or that you haven't really considered before. So we'll just get right into it. The basic definition of direct marketing is simply selling further up the distribution chain from the base level, which is selling your fish to, to the processor, to the tender. And
fucking gas station, and then everything is full.
Hi, there's some background noise with regards to conversation. If you can mute your phone, that would be great. Thank you.
So
go ahead, Terry. Go ahead, Terry. I muted them, actually.
Thank you. What the direct marketer does is several of the jobs that are in the line of that distribution chain. It does those jobs, takes the risks that each of those takes, and hopefully gets paid the amounts of money that those people on those other levels of the distribution chain would be making. In other words, going direct to the consumer or direct to some other level higher up on the distribution system. What we're not talking about in this class, nor in the direct marketing manual for the most part, is processing. And it's easy to kind of confuse the two because they often kind of blend together. But basically, the manual and this class are not about how to process product. They're about how to market it. And in some cases, that involves processing, but we won't get into too much detail on that. So this is probably a familiar chain to you. You normally sell to a tender who sells to a primary processor. And then after that, the rest of the chain may be pretty much out of sight, but there may be a secondary processor. There may be even a higher level value-added processor. There may be a company sales department. They may work through a broker. There's people providing transportation for the product to its destination. At the destination, there may be a trader or distributor who then breaks a larger quantity up into smaller quantities and then delivers them locally to a food service or to a retailer. And if the product goes to food service, then somebody will eat it. And if the product goes to retailer, then somebody will come into the store and buy it. There's a bunch of terms there, and I hope that they're all familiar to you. And actually, if anybody would like to jump in right now, if any of those terms are unclear, this might be a good time to clarify. And if not, or if you're too shy to jump in right now, the back of the direct marketing manual has a what do you call it? An index that has a glossary that explains those terms. Would anybody like to get any clarification on any of that so far? Okay, so I think the basic message, and it's sometimes a little bit hard for fishermen to understand initially, is that when you go into the direct marketing business, you step out of the fishing business and into the seafood business. And that's a whole different paradigm. It's a whole different way of working. And some of these, well, I'll try to explain some of those differences in the next few minutes. At the bottom of the screen are just a few sites. These are all people I know, so I'm kind of familiar with what they do. Cape Clear is a troller, in case you don't know Rick Altman, freezer troller. So that's a good model to look at for what he's done. And I think everybody here is probably familiar with what the Salmon Sisters do. They have a very diversified business. So here's kind of a laundry list, 2 pages of laundry list. These are things that direct marketers do. And you can just read it off the screen. I don't have to read it for you. But the point of this list is that when you sort of drill down into it, you find that there's a lot more involved than just catching fish, putting them in a box, and sending them to somebody. And almost everybody is good at some of these things and not so good at others. But if you're in the business, you more than likely are going to have to do all of them. Now, there's an exception to that statement, which I'll get to later, but some of these things, if you already have your market, if you already know, if you're already selling it, you know, through your uncle's fish store or something, then some of these things you don't have to do. The market research may already be covered. But if you're starting off cold and don't know where you're going to sell, this is a big part of the job. These are some kind of more obvious things that direct marketers do, but you can, you know, think through them and make sure that you understand everything that's involved. When I was doing it myself as a troller down in Ketchikan, we you know, we got stymied a number of times with simple details about how to box and band and label, and how to, you know, what the airline flight scheduled deadlines were, and a bunch of things like that. So these are all things that are more than likely you're going to have to deal with. The simplest form in the model that a lot of people use is a catcher-seller, and Gabe will be talking about that later, what catcher-seller regulations are. I think I only heard one person in the intro who's not Alaskan, or maybe a couple who are living out of state right now, but with regard to just some of these comments that I'll be making, and some that a lot of what Gabe will be doing, keep in mind these are Alaska regulations, and things that pertain to what goes on at the catching end, getting the fish, you know, into the box and on the plane and all that, is covered by Alaska regulation. Selling it directly to the consumer out of state is covered by other states' regulations. So everything that Gabe tells you is absolutely true and is absolutely verified, unless we get an update to that. As far as we know, it's all correct with regard to Alaska regulation, but we can't really tell you much what the regulations are for selling product in your state if you're planning to sell, or in the state in which you're planning to sell. So, you know, the simple model, the dockside sales usually is in the form of a dressed, head-on dressed fish, iced and, you know, nicely presented, but otherwise untouched and not processed. But if you are not in a location where it's feasible to sell directly to the public off your boat, then you obviously have to consider a variety of other formats for selling your fish. And this is just a short list. I'm sure you know all about these different options, but I just post them here in case something hadn't occurred to you. We've all heard about community-supported fisheries. We may not have heard about restaurant-supported fisheries, but it's the same concept. And we have some experience right within our program with CFS and some kind of buying clubs and things like that. There are very viable ways that people have worked up to distribute their fish. And of course, right in the middle there is online sales. And what you find a lot of people are doing now is selling over the web or over social media. This is a page out of a site called Market Your Catch, which was put up by the University of California at Santa Barbara Sea Grant program, I guess. And it was, it's linked in your presentation. And I think it's a very nice site. It does a lot of the same things that we're doing. It has some advantage of graphics. It has a different kind of page layout, and people who are used to learning from the internet might find this a really helpful online publication. And this is an example of the kind of graphics that they have, where you can compare several of the different kinds of direct marketing formats or outlets, and you can compare the amount of labor and time and the amount of interaction that you get, things like that. So, I think probably if you're in this class already, you have decided that you understand, you perceive some benefits. And, here are some of the potential benefits. Usually what people think of in terms of direct marketing benefits is that they expect to receive a higher price for their fish than they would have gotten by selling, by delivering to a tender or selling to the processor. And, but when you talk to people who are in direct marketing, who have their businesses and been doing it a while, they often, they mention other things. They mention other forms of satisfaction that comes from the direct contact with their customers, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's contact with individual customers through their marketing channels, through email and telephone and that kind of thing. So there's kind of just a little short list of what some of the benefits are. What may be a little bit less obvious is what some of the disadvantages or challenges are. And in my view, one of the greatest of those is that it's extremely time consuming and labor intensive. And many people have gotten into direct marketing that I've been in touch with, we've all been in touch with through the years, who said, well, yeah, I did it for a while, but it just took too much time. It was too much work, or it took me away from the fishing. It cut into the time that I could devote to not only running the boat and catching fish, but doing all the other things involved with, maintenance and all of that. So here's some possible challenges to think about. One of the things that I found with trolling was that on the days that you had to run in to take your fish to the airport to send them out, you were not fishing, and those might have been good days that you missed. Someone who's fishing on a weekly fishing schedule might not have that problem. You just fish at the end of your weekly period, and you've got a couple of days off, and that's not a problem. This is intended to clarify the difference between marketing and selling. And marketing means a lot of different things. The term market has a number of different definitions or implications, but in the context of what we're talking about here in this class, these are some of the factors that are involved in marketing your product. And you'll notice that down near the bottom is sales, is actually selling, is making calls, and basically persuading people to buy your product, and then servicing their accounts, fulfilling their orders. But that's, as you can see, what is that, about number 5 or 6 on the list. First is figuring out what the market situation is. Is there in the area that you're interested in, is there a shortage of fish or a surplus of fish already in the market? Doing some market research to find out what the potential is for finding buyers who can afford your product and would be interested. Studying who else is in the business, who your competition is. Doing promotion, doing advertising and the other kinds of non-advertising promotion, PR, image advertising, and so on. And later on in the course, you'll be getting some good ideas about how to do both promotion and product advertising. And then finally is collecting the money and addressing any problems that might have arisen during the course of any given delivery. Normally, and I'm thinking here in terms of salmon primarily and halibut, secondarily, possibly black cod, almost all the fish products that we're talking about in this class involve a product that's simply a gilled and gutted fish, whole fish, gills out, insides out, and washed, what they call sliming, which basically means just cleaning, washing, and chilling. Generally, even removing heads is not allowed for direct marketing unless you go on to the next step of processing, which requires a processing permit. And that's a key point to remember, is that processing is a whole different subject. It requires permits, it requires approved facilities. It's certainly doable in many circumstances. Lots of people do it, but it's not a simple matter of taking a fish and filleting it, or even cutting the head off and selling it that way, staking it or something like that. That's not direct marketing, that's processing, and that's a whole different set of regulations and requirements. The way a lot of direct marketers deal with that, though, when they find that the demand is for a processed product, is to contract with a licensed processor, or simply purchase products that have already been processed. And lots of people in a place like Bristol Bay, for example, where it's really difficult for them to do their own processing, simply deliver their fish to a local buyer, and then they go back and buy, ostensibly their own fish back, although there's no way to really trace that. But they buy a product that's very similar to what they deliver, that's now been value-added processed, and then they can take that product out and sell it. And of course, you don't have to be a fisherman to do that. You can simply set yourself up as a dealer who buys processed seafood products and then turns around and sells them in a market where you can make a profit. When you consider doing any of that, there's a bunch of factors to take into account. You can see them on the screen there. Perishability is a big one, shipping costs, and so on. Remember that the seafood products that we are familiar with, living in Alaska or fishing in Alaska, may not necessarily be familiar to people in other parts of the country. And an interesting byproduct of the whole farm salmon industry is that many parts of the U.S., people had never seen a salmon and didn't know what to do with one, and weren't particularly interested until relatively low-cost farm salmon started breaking into the market. And it's actually been an advantage to wild salmon producers in some cases, because it's helped address the problem of cultural familiarity with some kinds of seafood products. So here's some examples. These are things that people have done or had done with their products, aside from simply addressed, head on, gills out, guts out fish. And you can read the list. You can have them filleted, steaked, portioned. You can have them ground up into burger. You can have them canned, smoked, made into jerky, lox, that's mild cure, that's lightly salted. You can sell the heads separately. You can make up sampler boxes. You can even sell them as dog food. And these sites that are on the screen are a couple of examples of, what I think are companies that have done a nice job with making making products, small scale, direct marketed products. And that's pretty much what I have to say on this subject for now. You may be interested in looking at these videos. They're done in a different kind of part of the country. They're for shrimp fishermen, and they describe some of the same concepts but a little bit differently. And so for an alternative point of view about how direct marketing is done, you might want to take a quick look at those videos and see if it stimulates your thinking on anything. So that's pretty much it for my portion of this evening's discussion. But I'd like to throw it open right now for any questions or comments. If anybody saw anything that didn't sit right with you, or that your experience contradicts, or anything like that, can we have just a few minutes for participants in the class to express themselves? Well, hearing none at this point, Quentin, you want to take over from here?
Yes, I think, thank you very much. Do you have a homework assignment for the group or not, Terry?
Well, no, I don't actually at this, for this short session, but I'll actually think about that while Gabe is talking.
Okay. So Gabe, the next speaker, it's going to be Gabe Dunham. He's our Dillingham agent, and he's going to share with us his thoughts on regulations and permits to get into direct marketing. Go ahead, Gabe.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm just using my speaker on my microphone on my computer. Is this all right? All right, wonderful. Well, great. I'm going to, I'm the map agent out here in Bristol Bay. I'm a fisherman myself, and similar to what Terry just said, some of the reasons that get into direct marketing maybe because they just, like I have today, received their settlement from their process, think they can do better. So I just had to reiterate that because it just kind of hits pretty close to home sometimes, depending on the year. So I'll be talking today about some of the rules and regulations, some of the permitting associated with some of these with these activities that are sort of under the umbrella term of direct marketing. And direct marketing is really kind of a term that gets applied to a whole group of activities, but it does have some pretty specific definitions depending on which of these regulatory agencies you're addressing or applying for permits to. So let me real quick make sure I remember how to share my presentation. Sharing my screen. And this one. All right, how does that look to everyone?
Looks good, Gabe.
Okay, getting the full thing and it's centered. Awesome. All right. Okay, so like I said, here's my title: Rules, Regulations, and Permits. Let's go to the oh shoot, now it's covering up. Hang on, technical difficulties. 1 second. I've got to move things over. All right, there we go. Are those slides advancing for you guys? Can you see those? Okay,
Yes,
good. Like Quentin said, there's always kind of a period of adaptation as far as the technology goes. So thanks for your patience, and please, including those on the phone, speak up if you can't hear, or those on the computer, let me know if you can't see something or if it looks strange. But To get going here, let's just briefly talk about who cares when you start direct marketing. There are three main entities that really care when you start selling your seafood to anyone else besides just a tender or excuse me, a processor ostensibly through your tender. The first is concerned with food safety. There are two agencies responsible for that. First, at the state level, we have the Department of Environmental Conservation, or the DEC. Those are the folks that I'll talk about later. Those are the folks that you're gonna apply for a processing permit through, if indeed you are doing some processing. But even if you're not doing some processing, you may have to do, at the very least, some conversation back and forth, and perhaps maybe even a waiver of some sort with the DEC. The other institution or agency is at the federal level, the Food and Drug Administration. If you're dealing primarily in Alaska, their role seems to be, relatively minor compared to that of the DEC, especially if you're trying to apply for a permit to be a full-blown processor. But there are some requirements that the FDA does require of everyone who's producing food for human consumption, and I'll touch on those towards the end of these slides. The Department of Revenue here in Alaska is concerned with taxes. The state of Alaska wants to be paid their chunk, and if you're direct marketing, Terry touched on it also too. You're basically taking up one or perhaps more of the positions that are currently occupied in the seafood supply chain, and those positions. When you take over those positions, you also take over their tax liability, and the Department of Revenue is pretty particular about how they calculate that, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. And last, of course, is the resource management side of the equation too. The Department of Fish and Game, and if you're dealing with federal fisheries too, the NIMS, or National Marine Fisheries Service, they still want to keep track of what's coming out of the ocean, as is their job. So these are the three entities you're going to be dealing with on some level or another, if you're doing activities under that umbrella term again of direct marketing. So for this talk, I'm really going to talk about. I'm going to go over three different types of direct marketing activities. We'll talk about catcher processors, of which the actual term direct marketers for vessels under 65 feet, and also as sole proprietors, they fall under this catcher processor definition. We'll go over some of the requirements for catcher sellers and also for exporters too, both buyer exporters and catcher exporters. Then we'll talk about, so I'll talk about the requirements for each type. We'll go over some additional requirements you may have to deal with depending on any special circumstances that you might have to adhere to. I'll touch briefly on federal fisheries, and then I've got a couple of scenarios towards the end of my slideshow too, to just sort of round out some of these requirements for these various activities. A few quick notes though along the way. I'm going to transfer screens over to some resources. I think Quentin sent everyone out those resources via email, and there are quite a few of them, and I think there might be as many as 8 attachments there. So I'll be referencing those a little bit. You'll notice that the seafood processing regulations is one of those attachments. We're not going to go through or have you look up anything right now in the seafood regulations or seafood processing regulations, but it is there for a resource because as I'll describe later, it's pretty important to at least be able to navigate your way around that document to see and be able to reference those parts of the regulations that apply directly to your business. And also, just similar to what Terry did when he was done talking, I'll give you guys some time to talk too. But I'm not going to be selfish. If you've got a question for Terry that you didn't think of in time, feel free to blurt that out too during the Q&A when I'm finished here. So with that, let's get going. So the first thing I suppose you need to one of the first things you need to figure out is what kind of direct marketing activities you want to get into. As I mentioned, the catcher processor group of activities also includes the direct marketer. But by broad definition, the catcher processor is a business that catches, processes, and sells processed seafood products for human consumption. Of these catcher processor activities, there's the direct marketer, and if it's a vessel-based operation, is going to be that of a boat less than 65 feet long, and the direct marketer can only process their own catch. If you're dealing with a boat that's over 65 feet long, then you're into the catcher processor definition underneath that term of catcher processor activities. And again, you can either only process your own catch, or if you want to buy or custom process but not catch, then you're going into the territory of a floating processor definition for, again, boats over 65 feet long. But also, interestingly enough, for trawlers, and I think we've got at least one trawler in the group here. I think Lynn might have some good feedback here that if you're involved in any kind of roe recovery, which is the sale of roe for human consumption, you're also required to be a catcher processor to do that legally. Moving on to the next type, catcher sellers. These are folks that sell their own catch for human consumption, and this is unprocessed catch at the dock to consumers or to food establishments with a DEC seafood processing waiver, or those catcher sellers can sell their catch as bait. It's important to note that the catcher seller is responsible for confirming that a food establishment that they sell their catch to does have that DEC seafood processing waiver. I'm not exactly sure on how much trouble a person gets into if they don't confirm that, and it's found that food establishment doesn't have their processing waiver, but I do know that there is at very least some shared liability for having that, for the food establishment to have that certification. Also, let me briefly touch on some of the definitions for processing too. Terry talked about it, but really, if you alter or butcher a fish or cut its head off, really anything that you do to a boat, to seafood, besides gill and gut for fish at sea, is considered processing. Even if you put that seafood in say a refrigerated a freezer styrofoam box and ship it to Anchorage from Bristol Bay, that's also considered processing, and you need the appropriate DEC seafood processor's permit to be able to do that. There are some, in my communication with the DEC while putting some of this information together, there are some gray areas, and I think there are folks at ADF&G that will also say the same thing as the DEC when they say it's not really that they don't know the answers to specific direct marketing questions. It's that they're relatively uncommon questions, and they're not so the answers aren't common knowledge even within some of these agencies that make the rules. So I guess what I should have said at the outset is one of the most important things you can do if you're concerned with whether or not you're meeting a particular regulation or if you've got the right permit is to establish early and dare I say friendly rapport with the agency responsible for making some of these rules. That relationship that you make with those folks at these agencies is really important. It can really help you get your answers in a timely manner and make sure that you're following all the rules. And I've got some contact information for a person both at the DEC and at ADF&G that are really pretty helpful and good resources for information. I'll share that. I think that's my last slide, actually. So there's the definition for catcher seller. Sorry for the slight digression. The last one I'll talk about is the exporter definition of activities, and that's a business that transports product out of Alaska under a government health regulatory agency. Two different kinds of exporters. There's a catcher exporter. This is the business that catches and transports their fish out of the state to a processing facility. And the buyer exporter is the business that buys unprocessed seafood from harvesters for transport out of the state. So with those three types, let me start off with the catcher processors. And again, this is where the specific defined activity of direct marketing falls under the catcher processors. A couple of requirements or a couple of applications that a person seeking to operate under this description. First is the application for the Alaska Direct Marketing Fisheries Business License and intent to operate. This is this is an online application that is only a few years old to my knowledge. It used to be that you perhaps had to do both of these separately in good old-fashioned mail-in PDF applications, but now you go to this one site that covers both the application for the Department of Revenue and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And so as you can imagine, since we're covering both the DOR and ADF&G, it's a pretty lengthy application. But let me switch screens here and show you one of the resources that I attached. Let's see, where are we? Seafood activities. One of the resources that I gave you, scroll all the way to the top, is this direct marketing permit or fisheries business license application instructions. This was written by Shalene Hutter at F2017, and it's really a pretty exhaustive and thorough set of steps to go through the application for the fisheries business license. And if you look right at the top, the link toward the top of the screen where my cursor is right now, if you click on that link, that's gonna take you directly to that revenue online page that you see the screenshot of right below. So a few things that I wanted to point out, that I wanted to point out for this or on this application. First is that if you follow these instructions here, go through, let's see, yes, I want a new license and permit. You're going to fill out your business type and your information. It's important to notice one thing that I mentioned earlier, that a direct marketer with is again a person who's got a boat and who's working off a vessel that's less than 65 feet in length. But also it's a requirement here in this business license application that a direct marketer apply as a sole proprietor. I don't really understand why they require you to apply as a sole proprietor, and I've asked ADF&G, and they don't really know either. And so my assumption that this is a Department of Revenue requirement. But the solution, as they suggest here on this page, is that you just simply sell your fish from your sole proprietorship, who holds the direct marketing permit, to whatever business perhaps the rest of your operation is covered under an LLC or other maybe liability limiting business format. But you just simply sell your fish or transfer ownership of your fish from your sole proprietorship to your LLC or other business that's maybe running your vessel or selling the fish to the consumer or what have you. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that you are required to be a CFEC permit holder. It'll ask you through this application that for your permit number, so you have to enter that in. So have that handy when you're doing that. Also, this, as you can imagine, being a Department of Revenue form, they're going to ask or they're going to cover fisheries business taxes. Now let me scroll down to the approximate page. My apologies if this looks unsightly as I'm sharing my screen and scrolling through stuff here. But the Department of Revenue is going to ask you about your tax liability. So the taxes, this has a tax calculator in it, and a direct marketer is responsible for 3% of the normal landed value of their fish. Let me see if I can come up with a better definition of how you can get that estimated value. Okay, here it is. So the value here on taxes is based on the value of fisheries resources of like kind paid to other fishermen in the same area for the previous year. So if you are trying to estimate your tax liability, you're just basically going to use the average price paid to people in your same area of last year. And if your tax liability, which is 3% of your total, the total value of your fish based on that value from last year, if that is greater than $500, then you have to post a bond or prepay that estimated tax amount. If it's less than $500, you don't have to do that. So really, basically, I think if it's less than about $16,000 of total value, you don't have to pay that tax surety. You're still going to have to pay the tax, but you don't have to pay it up front. Let's see, what else was I going to tell you about this particular application? Oh, sure. The fee for any type of direct marketing activity, and let me scroll back up here so I can show you where they present to you the list. There we go. The list of direct marketing activities. Here, I'll zoom in so you can kind of read my screen a little bit better. So here's the list, and any type of license you apply for is going to require a $25 fee, and they won't process the application until you pay that fee. So that is, let me get away from this. So that is the direct marketing fishery business license application and intent to operate. The next thing that a catcher processor or direct marketer is going to be responsible for is the commercial operator annual report or core report. And this is basically a record of annual activity. And this is required for any fish that you write a ticket for under your processor code. This is due April 1st for the previous year. And if you were to follow this link right here, it would take you to, let me navigate over there. Let's see. Nope. Fish tickets, core reporting. Here you go. If you were to follow that link on my slide, it would take you to this page right here, which gives you some good information about core reporting. It's not a horribly complicated process, but there are some details that you have to be sure and include in this core report. Let's see, where exactly? Here we go. There's some instructions down here at the bottom, toward the bottom of the screen where my cursor is and where it's just highlighted. That can be a useful document when doing the core reporting. Due April 1 for the previous year. Excuse me. Okay, so moving on. Another thing that's required, since you're basically taking the place of that first purchaser of a seafood product, are fish tickets. These fish tickets are required by first purchasers, processors, exporters, or transporters of raw seafood products. This basically provides ADF&G with a record of each transaction. And since we have an ADF&G person here, Tammy, I welcome your feedback at the end here if I misspeak on any ADF&G requirements, of course. But so another thing I'd like to point out though is that electronic reporting might be available for you if you're engaged in a catcher processor activity. And as far as I know, they're available for all fisheries, or they're now being used, I should say, for all fisheries except for herring. I do not know whether or not that precludes your obtaining a code plate through your application with the fisheries business license, but that's a great question for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And again, that I've got a great resource phone number at the end at the end of this presentation on the last slide. Okay. All right. Speaking of the Department of Revenue and going back to this idea of taxes, you're going to be required to pay a fisheries or file a fisheries business tax return. And you may have seen it pop up previously as I was looking for something else, but if you follow that link right there, that will take you to, okay. There's the core report. There we go. That'll take you to this page right here. And these are some of the various fisheries related taxes that you want to check out and see if they apply to your specific desired activity. So there's that resource. Click out of here. Among these, there's the fisheries business tax. This is paid by the first processor of seafood. There's the landing tax, which you may or may not be responsible for. This is really directed towards fish that are harvested outside state boundaries, but brought into the inside the 3-mile state boundary for handling or delivery or whatnot. There's the salmon enhancement tax. If you are catching fish that whose development was aided by a hatchery, this would apply to you. There's a seafood marketing. This is something that you're going to have to pay if you are processing above or more than $50,000 worth of product annually. You'll be liable to pay that. And I don't remember what exactly it is off the top of my head, and nor do I have it listed here, but you'll be required to pay that seafood marketing assessment tax. And of course, if you're going to be selling anywhere within a taxed area, taxes are going to apply. Also, for those folks who in Bristol Bay, you're going to be paying either any applicable borough or local harvesting taxes too. I'm getting a little bit of noise from someone's phone. 830-0744. If you wouldn't mind muting your phone, I'd appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, moving on. So let's talk a little bit about the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, with the DEC. If you're required to, if you're going to be a direct marketer or engage in any kind of processing activity, and in some cases engaging in transportation or other activities, you're going to require to file a seafood processing permit application through the DEC. Let me switch pages here again to show you another one of the resources here. There it is. Okay, so this is the DEC has been nice enough to, along with the ADF&G, supply some instructions for filling out their application. This one is a little bit less lengthy, and it's actually really pretty general. The application itself is relatively basic. So there's 4 pages of instructions. Just generally, they want your business information, the information about your facility, what kind of activities you're going to be doing, the harvest area, what kind of distribution, or what your product distribution looks like, things like that. Let's see, I've got a page here that shows the fees. Go over here. Here are the fees that are going to be charged to these various forms of processors. So if you own a shore-based facility and you're doing less than 5,000 pounds per day, $795. And you can read the rest from there. If you've got an operation that's on the water, again, here's the direct marketing vessel, excuse me, less than 65 feet description. That's a $325 fee for that license, or excuse me, for that permit. And you can also get this information off the DEC site too. The one thing I wanted to, let's see, back up 1 second. Whoops. All right, so we're not going to read this. I just wanted to show you a little bit of the format of what the DEC regulation looks like. But this is, again, and let me page back here. this is what the DEC regulation book, excuse me, looks like for seafood processing and inspection. And it's a pretty lengthy document at 80-something pages. But the cool thing is that it's relatively easy to navigate. It will just take you a little bit to figure out the how the various numbers work. But if you've got a good quality PDF, and I think the one that I sent you is will do this, you can actually you should be able to search these various regulations, so you can go right to the ones that apply to you. But a couple of things I want to do. Wanted to point out on this particular list, this paragraph up here describes that the following is required in addition to your seafood processing application. And my personal favorite is the first line there that says, if you don't pay us first, we're not even going to look at it. But then if you look at some of the additional numbered bullets there, they get pretty specific. They want to list some ingredients if you're going to be doing anything that seems like it would apply to a value-added product where you can have a few or more ingredients. If you're going to have, they talk about your hazard analysis and whether or not you've identified that you need a HACCP plan. If you're a processor, in all likelihood, you're going to need a HACCP plan. But that's an excellent question for some of the seafood processing specialists around the state, and particularly the ones that we have with Alaska Sea Grant. They talk a little bit about canning in here. Importantly, for those working on the water, bullet number 5 talks about how for a mobile processing facility, there are specific locations that you can and can't get an inspection done on your vessel, and you have to basically set that up ahead of time. So you really can't call the DEC the day before and say, hey, meet me at the dock in Pelican and inspect my boat. They want a little bit more process and procedure associated with it than that. They talk about water treatment for wastewater disposal in here, and they also have they also talk about certain rules that apply to using somebody else's permitted facility. So there's some good information. If you're curious about, if you've got a question that you think lies in the gray area of these DEC regulations, I will suggest that before calling the DEC, you take a look at this, take a look at the regulations and make sure that you've read them first before calling folks at the office, because they're going to turn you right back to the regulations if you haven't read them already. Okay, one more thing that's required for, I shouldn't say one more thing, but another thing that's required for catcher processors is that any product that you sell to the public has to cross a certified measuring or weighing device. If you're, and let me clarify that here by saying if you're selling product by the pound. One way that that you may not have to, or that this rule may not pertain to your operations is that if you're selling product by the fish. So if you're selling product by the fish, then you're using a different measurement standard than weight. But if you're selling product by the pound, the scale has to be NTEP certified, and it should have that sticker bearing the NTEP logo, I believe, or at least it's going to have a sticker on it that says legal for trade. And it does have to be tested by the Alaska Department of Transportation measurement standards. And I have the contact list for AKDOT measurement standards. If you follow that link that's given on the page there, it'll take you to the contact for the offices, which I believe are in Juneau and Anchorage, and they're pretty easygoing folks to talk to, and they're full of great information too. So if you've got questions about a scale or getting a scale tested, don't hesitate to contact them. Some of their test rates are posted there at the bottom. The test rates go up as you go up in scale size. one thing I will mention is that through my conversation with the guy from the Measurement Standards Office, he suggests that before you purchase a scale, find out where you can send it, because excuse me, let me rephrase that. Before you purchase a scale and arrange for it to be shipped, understand exactly what the Measurements and Standards Office can do, because they can certify it, but calibration is something else. So contact them, and before you just have a new certifiable scale shipped directly to their office. Okay, moving on from catcher processors to catcher sellers. Again, these are the folks that are going to be basically selling unprocessed product right off their boat, ostensibly from the dock, to consumers. You still have to fill out the Alaska Direct Marketing Fisheries Business License application and intent to operate. But the difference is you may not have to go through all the additional steps that are outlined by some of the other direct marketing activities covered under that same business license application. And to show you a little bit more about what I'm talking about when I say that, let me navigate back to, let me navigate to an attachment that I sent you called the Allowable Activities Matrix. This is another Alaska Department of Fish and Game product. I think Shalene Hutter also wrote this. But if you look at the second line up here, and I'll try to highlight it without making the screen get all weird. But if you look at that highlighted line, you can see there's a distinction between those types of direct marketing activities that are listed on the second row that require an ADF&G only permit versus the fisheries business license. Regardless of the fact that they're delineated here in this list, you can still access the application for any of these activities through that joint DOR and ADF&G application. You just, as I showed you on the instructions, the application instructions earlier, you just choose from that list your desired activity. So just a point of clarification. But again, since I forgot to, neglected to go over this earlier, I can just cover this now. But here are on the second row, these are all the various activities that may fall under the umbrella term of direct marketing. And below that, on each subsequent row, they've got additional information about what that activity can and can't do, along with some usable footnotes here that I've scrolled down to that you can see right there. This is a good reference resource. I encourage you to study that if you've got. This should be really your first go-to if you've got a question about whether you are or are not allowed to do X activity under the direct marketing activity that you want to do. So there's that resource. So navigating back over here. So you're going to go through that online DOR ADF&G application. You're also going to be required to file fish tickets, and you may or may not be able to use e-landings. If you're going to sell stuff by the pound, you've got to have that certified measuring device, and also you're going to have to file a fisheries business tax return. Of course, if you're dealing with a federally managed species, you'll have to deal with any applicable federal requirements that I'll touch on a little bit in a subsequent slide. There we go. All right, so requirements for catcher exporters. Again, we've got that application for the direct marketing fisheries business license and intent to operate. And here you're just going to, as I said with the catcher seller application, you're going to simply select the button that says catcher exporter. The other thing that you may or may not be required to do is apply for the DEC seafood processor's permit. Even if you're having someone else, even if you're exporting to a processor, or excuse me, even if you're selling to a processor and exporting, you may still be required to have some form of a seafood processor's permit, because that seafood is ostensibly going to pass through your fingers in some other way besides harvesting before it gets further down the line towards the consumer. And that's really kind of what the DEC is concerned about. They're concerned about any kind of food hazards that could arise from transportation or processing after. So beyond that, you're going to be required to file those commercial operator annual reports, file the fish tickets, have that certified weighing device if applicable, the fisheries business tax return again, any tax or surety bonds, and of course any federal requirements. Okay, so those are the three general types that I want to go over. As you can see, there's kind of a lot of repetition, a lot of the same sort of procedures required, but there are some pretty significant nuances between those, and those are going to be apparent, particularly within that direct marketing business license and intent to operate. You'll be guided towards to different questions depending on which button you click next to your desired direct marketing activity. Of course, the DEC is going to require different things for those different activities. But some sort of some other requirements that may or may not apply to you, in addition to those I mentioned, are as follows. So the FDA, the federal folks, they're going to require that all food processors be registered. I don't think in fact, I'm sure it doesn't cost any money. You just have to register your business. If you are indeed processing food, you have to register with the FDA. Seafood products that are sold in retail size packages, those have to be labeled per the FDA. There may be a small business exemption, but the DEC also requires those individual retail size packages to be labeled. And if you follow those three links there, will take you to either directly to their pages or some more information resources for each one of those. All right, I promised a little bit of information on federal fisheries. So if you're direct marketing halibut or sable fish under IFQ or CBQ, any reporting that you already do in your commercial fishing endeavors is still required, such as prior notice of warning 3 hours in advance, and any transshipment authorization if you happen to be transferring catch between vessels. Plus, if you're going to be involved in direct marketing, a registered buyer permit has to be held by either the IFQ holder if you're selling at the dock, or the processor if you're selling to a custom processor, or the IFQ holder, the IFQ holder and registered buyer have to submit a landing report. Okay, so let's jump into a few scenarios here. The first scenario is what if a person wants to sell vacuum packed salmon caught from their, well, first, the question itself kind of gives away a lot of the requirements already. If it's a vacuum packed piece of seafood or any product, that you can assume that the DEC, or assumptions aside, the DEC will consider that processing if you're going to vacuum pack it. So that means that you are a catcher processor. And going from our checklist before, you're going to be required to have a fisheries business license. You will be in the direct marketer class if you're working off of a vessel that's less than 65 feet long. With the ADF&G, you're going to be required to file those fish tickets or e-landings if you can do that. The Department of Revenue is going to require your fisheries business tax return. You'll have to file core reports, and particularly if you're doing the processing yourself, you will have to apply for a DEC seafood processing permit. Again, if you're having some custom processing, if you're having this fish vacuum packed by someone else, you will at the very least will be required to have some sort of agreement with DEC that at least describes or outlines your system of transporting fish to your custom processor. And of course, the DEC is going to need to verify that your custom processor does indeed have their processing permit too. All right, so another scenario. What if you want to sell your halibut at the dock? Well, this fits along with the catcher-seller definition of direct marketing activity. You'll need a fisheries business license as catcher-seller, so you'll go through that online DOR and ADF&G permit, or excuse me, application process. You'll have to do fish tickets or e-landings. You'll be responsible for your fisheries business tax return, and you'll also likely be responsible for federal rules since halibut would fall under federal management regimes. So you'll be responsible for any applicable federal or and this is the first time I've mentioned this, but the mobile vending license. If you're going to be selling this product perhaps from the back of a truck that's next to your boat, that's an entirely different license that you'll have to have there. And I don't have any further information on that mobile vending license, but I can for you guys and send that out through the email chain. All right, so for the exporter, if you want to export your fish to an out-of-state processor, you're a exporter, you'll have to go through, again, the fisheries business license, check the box for catcher exporter. You'll need a DEC processing permit or at least some kind of waiver that I mentioned. ADF&G will require fish tickets, and you'll have to do the court report. You'll have to do a fisheries business tax return. And of course, if you're dealing with federal species, same as the halibut in the example before, you'll have to be sure and follow those rules as well. All right, so as promised, here are some of the contacts that I used in assembling this information. ADF&G's Shalene Hutter is a really great resource for the ADF&G and also for that joint DOR ADF&G application. She's a great resource of information. And speaking of Shalene, let me go back to one of my other resources that I provided to you. This is a presentation that Shalene me for distribution to basically anybody who wants it, who can use it as a resource. Some of this information in here may be duplicative in that I've already covered a little bit of it in my presentation, but if you're looking for more info, I encourage you to scroll through her PowerPoint here, or I guess I've got it transformed to a PDF, but I encourage you to go through and use that as a resource too. So there's the one contact. Give Shalene a call or an email if you have specific ADF&G questions, especially. For the DEC, I spoke to Cassandra Holvet. She is one of two people in the office at the DEC that can answer questions about direct marketing and how direct marketing activities require various DEC consideration. So I encourage you to give her a call too, and there's her email and phone number. So with that, oops, I think that's, yeah, like I said, that's my last slide. If you guys have any questions, I'll open it up now, and I'll particularly, before we do that, I'll go ahead and let either Tammy or Lynn, if either of the two of you have some information that you think would add to what I've put in here. If you think I've left something out, I encourage you to pipe up and contribute that. But if not, go ahead, everybody. We'll just go ahead and open it up. And also, this is, if you had a question for Terry previously, I'll put him on the spot right now and say, fire away.
Hey, this is Quentin here. We have David. I just see David's iPad. You just joined us. I think you're a little bit late. Can you introduce yourself and why you're taking the class, David?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can hear me okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, Dave Owen. I've been trolling Longlining since '85. Always been kind of curious in marketing a little bit. So, yeah, that's basically it.
So, David, where are you fishing out of?
I'm in Sitka.
All right. Thank you, David.
Hey, this is Alana. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a really quick question for Gabe. Early on in the slides, you were talking about being able to sell, I think, to food establishments with the DEC seafood processing waiver. How common is it for food establishments to have that processing waiver? And is it a complicated process for them to get that waiver? Is there a list somewhere we could see establishments that already have it? I was just looking for a little more information about that.
Sure. Hi, Alana. Thanks for the question. Those are three really good questions. It sounds like a great resource. If the DEC doesn't already have that, I would I'd suggest they do. But I don't know the answer to that question right now. But what I can do is I can try to find an answer for you and either email it out or pop in on Wednesday and answer it for you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering how common it is. It seems like a pretty simple way to get things done if a lot of people do have it already.
Sure. I mean, the thing that comes to my mind is whether or not any of the businesses here locally would have one of those. But that question has kind of sparked some interest in my mind as to what their requirements are. I mean, if they're trying to get one of these waivers, are they required to essentially do all the stuff that a person who's going to be processing seafood is going to have to do as well? Go through that lengthy seafood processor's application. So yeah, that's a great question.
Gabe, it's Jerry here. A couple of quick things. First of all, when you mentioned the NTEP certification on scales, when I was talking to Weights and Measurements about that subject earlier this year, I was interested to learn that they don't accept certification from another state, even if the scale is currently valid for use in a different state. It's has to be recertified here. The reason for that being that the weight actually changes with latitude. I wouldn't have guessed that was the case, but something to keep in mind. The other thing is, I just wanted to check with you for clarification because it surprised me when you said this, and that was that you said if you even put a fish in a box and ship it out, that's classified as processing.
Yep, that's correct. If you, yeah, exactly. If you ship fish, it is considered processing. And I had some questions about this when I was dig up some of this info because I had a specific question from someone here locally that was wondering if it's still considered processing if they're just transporting their fish, by all proper definitions, unprocessed, to a processing facility, just a very short plane ride away, for example. And that seemed, in my conversation with the DEC, with Cassandra, actually, it seemed to be a really gray area. And what I took away from the conversation is that the DEC is principally concerned minimizing or eliminating any human associated with foodborne illness. So anything that you do to fish that sounds like it could potentially create an opportunity for food spoilage or otherwise pathogen exposure or something like that is something that they're basically going to require a plan from you on how you're going to deal with that. And I think that in those really specific, it's about, what do you consider transportation? What do you consider processing? Those are definitely something you're going to want to contact the DEC for those specific questions, because they're probably going to have some kind of process by which you're going to assure them that you're not creating a dangerous food product for someone.
So then is it your understanding that a processing permit is required for basically just shipping fish in a box someplace? And if so, is there a site inspection required and all of the other things that normally go into a processing permit?
Another good question. I think at the very least, from operations that I know of, at the very least, you're going to be required to submit photos of the area that you're packaging up your fish, and a description of how you're doing basically everything when you handle the product. That's not to say that you wouldn't receive a surprise visit. Of course, some of the other seafood experts, particularly our seafood experts, would probably know more about inspections. I believe you're going to be at the very least required to submit photos of the area.
So Gabe, so if you're transporting fish in a box and you consider processing, that means that you have to take a hazard class or under hazard.
Another good question. I posed that very same question to DEC, and they said if you identify hazards, if in your analysis you identify hazards, then you need to have a hazard plan to deal with those hazards. Then you need to do that plan right. Of course, you need a hazard certification, right? So, but she was much more vague as to whether or not you needed a HACCP certification to do an analysis on whether or not you had hazards.
So better not ask and just take photos and do it.
Yeah, I would say better get information from the source. If it's anything concerning the DEC, I would certainly be. I mean, because as Terry mentioned, you're if you're a direct marketer, if you're selling food directly to people, you are taking on the liability of producing that food. So if you have any questions at all, contact the DEC. And you can see that their application is relatively simple. Even the instructions are only 4 pages long. But if you look at the actual Alaska law that backs up that application, they say it's like, yes, but if you're going to do this, then you need this, this, and this also. So it really, I think, it behooves anyone to contact the DEC if they have a sliver of a question.
Thanks. So any more comments with to either Gabe or Terry? Okay. If not,
this is Tammy. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Tammy.
So I guess I just wanted to say some of the things that we get at Fish and Game, and I'm kind of the middle person here, so I don't know the whole process exactly, but I think knowing how to fill out your fish tickets is super important, because I bet half of the people that turn them in don't have them filled out correctly, which I think at some point becomes painful. The other thing is turning them in on time. I don't know that everyone realizes that that's a big deal, but it ends up with the troopers if they're not. So again, I think that sort of ends up being painful. And then having enough time, I think if you're doing direct marketer, that if DEC has to come out and visit your vessel, I know at some point this spring and summer, it was like 2 to 4 months. So it's, I think, something you definitely have to make sure you set aside enough time to get all your ducks in a row for, because I don't think people realize how much time it actually takes.
Thank you, Tammy. Good tips. Alexis, you unmuted for a little bit. Did you have a question or comment?
I did. It was about the certified scales. If you're a direct marketer, but you're using an already certified processor to a shore-based processor to custom process your catch, do you also need to have a certified scale? Because don't they have scales for weights?
Correct. Yeah. This question came up, I think, last year when we were talking about this very subject, and if the processor stamps or does a label for you and stamps a certain weight on the product, then that is the that's the certification requirement. Assuming that they have a certified scale, which wouldn't hurt to double check and ask your custom processor if you could perhaps have them send you a photo of the certification sticker on their scale. They probably wouldn't mind. But the conclusion was last year that, yep, if you're having a custom processor do your work and you have them label your stuff and everything with a weight, then it's on them.
Thank you. Lynn, you have a couple of questions.
Yeah, just a couple of little clarification questions, not to harp on this DEC stuff too much, but just to clarify on that, we kind of talked about whole fish for all intents and purposes, unprocessed in shipping. If you're shipping out-of-state fish that's been custom processed by a HACCP certified facility and all that, do I still need DEC approval or permitting for the shipment on that?
Thanks for that question, Lynn. As I understand it, if you are using a custom processor who probably, or of course has the DEC processing permit, you still need to be what's the term? You still need to be known as an approved source or permitted processor by the DEC.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. And then the other quick one was on the seafood marketing assessment tax or valuation or whatever there. The $50,000 cutoff limit, is that on, say dock value, or is that end of the line retail value?
Since that's something, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one. Since it's something that's paid by the processor, I can't tell you off the top of my head which that represents. So I'll find out and I'll get the answer.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
We still have plenty of time for questions or comments.
Gabe, I wanted to add, one other thing. You had a short section there about federal fisheries, IFQ and CDQ fisheries. And that is really almost an entirely different set of regulations, as you pointed out. The current direct marketing manual has a whole appendix on that, which was completely up to date at the time that it was published. There have been a few changes in the last 10 years. The new direct marketing manual will have a completely updated section on federal fisheries. If any of you who are working with halibut or black cod or any other federal fisheries, and you're to the point where you really need the latest on that subject, just send me an email and I'll send you the draft of that chapter. Like I say, the book won't be out probably for a couple more months, but if you're planning to sell halibut, it might be helpful to have the current story on what the regulations are concerning IFQ and CDQ fish. So just send me an email and I can forward that to you.
Okay, Lynn, I did just I think I found an answer for your seafood marketing assessment question just now. If handling more than $50,000 worth of product annually, processors must pay 0.3% of the ex-vessel value of all seafood processed, basically to fund the activities of ASME.
Oh, I got you on there.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You got it.
All right.
Yeah, Gabe, I have a question. This is Taylor.
Sure, Taylor.
Yeah, my question is if I'm buying seafood that's been processed and was shipped down to Seattle, if I'm buying it out of state, do I need to apply or get any permits from the state, or would it all just be at the federal level from there to market the fish?
So if you're an Alaska resident buying product in, let's just say, Washington and selling it in Washington, is that kind of the root of your question?
Yeah.
And it's not your own fish, or you're buying it from somebody else who's processed it?
Yeah, in this new scenario, it would be the processor that I sell my fish to as a fisherman.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
But I guess it doesn't have to be that situation. It could be any processor at that point. Same question.
Well, if it's bought and sold in another state besides Alaska, I would think that state's regulations would be applicable.
Okay. It seems like more or less you'd just be a broker at that point, but it seemed like there was a lot of permits with the state, that just in case I missed something.
Yeah, and Taylor, if you're working as a broker, and if you're doing it in Washington, I don't think personally, I don't think that Alaska law applies, because you're taking ownership in Washington of Alaska product, unless you are, maybe there are some caveat in law that you are reprocessing specifically your own product. You sell to Ocean Beauty, and then you put it on a label that is yours, your fish specifically, and then you reprocess it in Washington, that may be a different set of rules. But if you're just buying from Ocean Beauty and selling it, you don't have to go through, even think about direct marketing.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you're basically the same as any other distributor down there. All those regulations have been met. All those requirements have been met by the time it gets to you in that out-of-state location. If the state that you're in has its own requirements regarding processing of seafood products, that's another matter. But that wouldn't involve the state of Alaska. As long as it got to you legally down there, all those requirements have been met.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions or comments?
I'll just do one more little scenario with this DEC stuff again. If your custom processor handles the shipping for you, it's your product, you had a custom processor do it for you, and they handle the shipping under their contract, their shipper, their whatever, and then I am on the receiving end, do I still need the DEC permit? Or the DEC recognition or whatever you call it there, the approval?
I don't think you're going to need DEC approval to ship a product that's already been processed under a DEC processor's permit. Is that your question?
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess it wasn't. That was kind of my question previously, and I thought that I got out of it that I did need DEC approval to ship already custom processed product. Was I wrong on that?
I'll be honest with you. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to find out.
Okay, or I can just call DEC too. That's fine.
Sure. Or so are you talking about shipping across state lines or just within Alaska?
No, it would be out of state.
Okay. Well, if we're gonna call it DEC, tell me what they say, because I'm curious too.
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay. Any more comments or questions? Okay. You can always email us or call Gabe, and also email the entire group. I sent you this email so that we can have a very nice discussion among the group also. So you're welcome to do that. And if there are no questions, going once, going twice, we will see you on Wednesday, and Terry is going to pick up and talk about business planning and cost analysis, a little bit on markets. Okay.
Can I say something about? Do I get to assign homework? Or is that just something Terry gets to do?
Yes. Go ahead, please, Kate.
Well, it's not so much homework, but as Quentin mentioned during the last class, you guys are all going to have a chance to describe the business plan and operating scenario that you're going to come up with to the group. And my little piece of that is that in that description. Have pretty specific knowledge of and a plan for the various regulations and permits that are going to apply specifically to what you want to do. So there it is.
Terry?
I have one also, actually 3 very short items based on what I offered up this evening. One is make a one line or a short paragraph or whatever description of what product you think that you want to sell. In other words, is that just dressed, headed and gutted, or gilled and gutted, chilled, gilled and gutted? Is it some kind of value-added product? Just a brief list or description, or 2-word identification of what kind of product you think you might want to sell. And secondly, where. I suspect that most of you already have destinations in mind, in which case it should be pretty easy to simply jot it down. My neighborhood back in my hometown, or wherever that is. If not, if you don't have something already outlined, already identified, then give us a quick description about how you would, what some of the choices are, or how you would pick a place that you might do that. And then thirdly, I forget what the third thing was. Anyway, start with those two. It will give us a little starting point to think about how to kind of tailor our comments in the succeeding sessions. If we know sort of basically what you want to sell and how. In other words, we haven't got into marketing yet. We don't know how to actually find the people who will buy it. But if you can tell us just basically what you want to sell, and what part of the country, or what part of some descriptor for what your market area might be, that would be an interesting thing to know.
Any comments or questions for Gabe and Terry on your assignment? Okay, so we will see you on Wednesday, 5:30 Alaska time. Okay. Thank you very much for, Alexis, did you want to say something?
I just had one quick question for you, Quentin, with regard to Wednesday. I guess I might not be able to make Wednesday's session, but it seems that we're recording it. How fast will the recordings be available?
The next day.
The next day?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful in deciding.
I can email you the link. I can email everybody the link to the recording.
Okay.
I mean the day after, or even that night too. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. We will see you Wednesday. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.